Yep, so welcome everyone. Thanks very much for coming to this talk on data about data. So my name's Tom. I'm a data architect at Insider, and this talk is essentially going to be about not the data that we sort of process through our data systems, but the data that those systems generate. And as I said, the data about the data. And in particular, we're going to take a look at a solution called DataHub that we've been essentially trialing at Insider to help sort of answer some of these questions. So for the agenda, I'll give a little bit of an intro into who we are at Insider and kind of what data means to our organization. We'll talk about some of the challenges that we face with some of those systems in our architecture. And what I'm hoping to sort of draw out of that is that they're actually common challenges. They're not challenges, I think, that are particular to Insider or indeed really any organization that I've worked with. Set the bar really low for failure here because I'm going to attempt a live demo in the middle of this just to kind of demonstrate the tool. And really what I'll try to close out then is like how DataHub actually connects into all of the systems that we use at Insider, how we actually populate it. So just to give a little bit of background about Insider, we are a global news and business journalism organization. So founded in New York, the company originally was around, I think, 15 people as a startup. It's now over 500, and the Belfast team is just the latest addition to that. So as I said, I'm a data architect. I work within the data engineering organization. Insider itself really has a global reach as a brand and as a journalism organization. I get to, as of this week, say that we're an award-winning journalism organization. We picked up our first Pulitzer Prize on Thursday this week for illustrated reporting. And what that sort of global reach and audience, the figure there of readership of over 250 million editions all across the globe, is a lot of data for people like me to deal with. And just to kind of give a little bit of an insight into, the data engineering organization at Insider, it's, really if you view it as the sort of traditional data flowing left to right, ingesting from a variety of different sources, storing that in a data warehouse. So for us, the data warehouse is Snowflake, which if you're not familiar with Snowflake, it's a SaaS, cloud-native data warehouse solution. So ultimately, all of the data that we're ingesting, from internal sources like our content API, from external sources like Google Analytics about all of our traffic data, all of that data makes its way ultimately into the data warehouse. So that's where we're building our tables, our models, and ultimately it's getting served out to our analyst teams and to the business to actually derive insight from it. And what I love about drawing diagrams like this is the sort of false sense of order that it gives you. So like if it were as nice and neat and well ordered as that, I would really have very little to do. But the reality is that, for different source systems, we have competing versions. So we might have more than one version of a particular API that we need to pull from. When it comes to our data ingestion, we have everything from, a highly bespoke process written in Python to something like Fivetran, which again, that's a SaaS, so a more of a utility or a commodity service for data ingestion. And like ultimately, in my opinion, in architecture like this, for those lower value things, you're ultimately wanting to try to move towards more commodity solutions. But again, the reality is messy. Sometimes you have to turn around things in a time frame that wouldn't allow you to perhaps use one of those tools. And then finally, on this side of the stack, we use DBT quite heavily. So that is essentially a SQL templating language. So DBT is really the engine by which we transform our data, right? So we imagine us landing our Google Analytics data into Snowflake in the raw. There'll be an Airflow pipeline. Airflow is the orchestration. So something that says run this thing, twice daily, and then run these sequence of transformations in order. And what you get out the back of that, hopefully, is data that's actually usable to your analysts. So, really the actual business data, like all of these sources that actually goes through the platform on that journey to becoming usable at the end is really, the core of what we do. But an architecture like this has a whole other sort of constellation of stakeholders around it. So, I would be one of those. As a data architect, there's certain things that I want to know about the operation of all these different systems. Data engineers, data analysts, data scientists, an engineering director, the CTO. Really, all of these are the types of questions that then is where metadata comes in. So the data that all of those systems themselves are actually generating. And this is where I think we talk about, the commonality across different organizations. Like I could be talking about any number of organizations that I've worked for in the past when, describing some of these challenges. So things like analysts wanting to know, the timeliness of data, and the validity of it. So is the data that I'm looking at in this particular table, when was it actually refreshed? What assurances do I have around the numbers that I'm being provided with? What you quite often see, at least in my experience anyway, is that if you have, a very nice set of aggregated tables that sort of roll all your numbers up, trust in that is something that you really need to build, because quite often what people want to do is they want to go to the source, they want to go to the raw data, they want to see every step of the way how the information is actually derived. So you need to provide really good assurances around how you're coming to your sort of derived data sets. And then as someone who on a day-to-day basis tinkers with stuff all the time, and I want to have some assurances that if I make changes to a pipeline or to one of those DBT transformations, I'm not going to, what am I going to break potentially by doing this? So there's the maintenance angle to things, and being able to really understand the lineage of the data that we have. And so again, all of these questions, they are metadata questions. They're not anything that you ask of the data that you're actually putting through your system. They're from your schemas that describe your tables. They're from your DBT tests. They're actually, providing you some assertions against your data. And with any sort of common problem area like this, what you see is a sort of micro industry that develops around it. And when it comes to metadata management, it runs, and the sort of layout of this slide here is like established players to new entrants, kind of left to right. So you have your classic Informatica, a very familiar name in this space for a long time, through to solutions like DataHub, which we're going to demonstrate. But also things like Atlan, Amundsen, they very much fit in that same space with some of the features that we're going to look at. So why DataHub for us? Well, of the vendors that are on this slide, the vast majority of these are actually all pretty much commercial off-the-shelf software. So these are all bar, Amundsen, and DataHub software where you don't really have an open source route into it. Amundsen and DataHub do. And for us, DataHub has actual better feature parity with our stack. So when we come to look at the different things that we're ingesting from, again, as you saw on the previous slide, it's things like Snowflake, like DBT, like Airflow. And for us, the crucial thing that Amundsen was missing that DataHub has is Looker. And Looker is the Google Business Intelligence Suite. So it's really important for when we get to talking about lineage that you have that real end-to-end coverage. And I think the final point just on this, on the vendor slide, is that hopefully by the end of this talk, what I'm going to demonstrate is that there's kind of been a bit of a quiet shift in this space around the sort of philosophy and the capability of the tools. So this is the bit then where I pray to the demo gods, because we're going to take a little look at DataHub itself, just to really kind of give you a flavor for like what's the actual capability of this tool, what is this thing that we're talking about, and what can it do? And then, as I said, we'll close out by looking at how inside, or at least have we integrated that into our stack. Okay, so so this is DataHub. And it's a bit suspiciously Google-like in both like the look and the color choices here. But essentially, that's kind of what the front end of DataHub offers you, is basically data discovery. And the way that you structure the data when you bring it into a tool like DataHub is kind of really up to you. You can see here in this demo site that we have here, you can break your data up by domain, so that could traditionally mirror your structure in your data warehouse, or it could align to like business units in your business. So, sales, marketing, for us, editorial, for example, would be one. But if we scroll down here, what you can see in this snapshot is how it breaks it up by platform. And this would maybe give you some idea of the sort of the range of different connectors and different systems that this platform supports. So at Insider, for us, it's primarily that row along the top. So as I said, Snowflake, DBT, BigQuery, Airflow, those are kind of some of our core components. But equally well, if you're not a DBT user, if you're not a Snowflake user, it could apply to Postgres, to a Hive data warehouse. If you're using AWS, like if you're using S3 and AWS Glue, you have support for those things as well. So it's very dependent on your stack. And like I say, that factors into that technology selection exercise. So just to kind of demonstrate an example of a use case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for a tag. And some of the data sets in this demo have been tagged with a PII tag, right? So personally identifiable information, if I can say that. And so this is kind of the first clue as to really what's going on with the capability of the tool here. You sort of have this faceted search interface where you have your different tags on your data sets. You have your different sources, descriptions. All of this metadata that we're searching is in Elasticsearch under the hood. So that's kind of where this faceted search interface is coming in. And what DataHub does on the back end essentially is it's building a graph. So all of these data sets that we're ingesting, it's working out what the unique identifier for those are. So like for a table, that's the fully qualified name of the table, database schema, the table name, and the environment, whether this is development or production or test. And what it's clever enough to do, as you see here, kind of by the icons, if I drill into this data set, is that it's paired up the model in DBT with the underlying table. So again, to recap what DBT is, whenever we ingest this data, this particular panel is coming from Snowflake. So this is where you get your schema. This is your list of fields that are in this table and your descriptions, your data types. But you also get this view definition. This is being pulled from DBT, and it's telling us what the DBT model for this particular table looks like. This is essentially the SQL query. So again, as I said, DBT is just a templating language for SQL. So you can actually see here in the UI how that table's actually been derived. And DBT is a particularly good fit, I think, for this type of process, because as well as that SQL view of things, you also have the ability to define all kinds of metadata in DBT, which is obviously very good for this process. So you can have documentation, you can have your different properties that are defined in your DBT model. Statistics here, this is again being pulled from Snowflake. So this is all kind of summary statistics about the different columns in the table. Your row count, frequent queries, and at a very basic level, the timestamp on when this data set was last updated is really super useful for analysts. Again, that whole thing about timeliness, being able to understand when the data in your system was last refreshed. And the final thing then, which I think is a really big feature for us, certainly, of this tool, is the ability to visualize your lineage. So what you see here is, first of all, what depends on this table. So we can see there's a Looker dashboard that's actually consuming this data, but also we can drill back into the pipeline as well. We can see that there's a series of DBT transformations and tables that feed into this one. And if we drill even further back, you can see that the lineage includes your Airflow task that ran, the S3 bucket that pulled it from, and we could go on here. So again, back to that point, I can't tell you how many times I've been in the position where I'm trying to understand that dependency graph for our data pipelines in different organizations, like trying to understand, what's the authoritative source for a particular data set, and then, if we make changes to this, what's it going to impact? And then the final feature that I kind of want to just demonstrate here is also that if I drill into one of these other tables and just kind of show you another definition, again, this is all the technical metadata that's being pulled from Snowflake. So again, this is basically your table schema. But what we can also do is combine it with business metadata. So DataHub also is a data catalog. It has a business glossary. So you can see here an example of a field that's been tagged with a business term. And for us, our business glossary might look like, this is how we define a post, an author, an editor. Here's metrics around our traffic. So you have this business definition that's actually a level above any of the particular individual tools. And the good thing about that is that in the data catalog, you can then kind of tie together all the related entities. Is this where the demo is going to go? I almost made it to the end. Hey, okay. We made it. So again, first name, pretty basic example, but like if you take that as a concept, like a business term in your data model for your organization, you can see all the dashboards, all the pipelines, all the tables that are related to that concept. Okay, so that's the kind of whistle-stop tour of the tool. So just to kind of wrap things up then, there we go. How did we actually get to that? How does this actually all hang together on the back end? So to sort of look at our architecture in a slightly different way, like as in how engineers and analysts interact with it. For us, pretty much everything's GitOps driven. So our DBT models, our Looker dashboards, and it's one of the really nice features of Looker is that you can define all of your views and your components in a Git repository. There's a couple of different ways that DataHub hooks into this. So the first of those is scheduled ingestion. And when we looked at that slide about vendors, this is almost like the traditional way data cataloging tools work, right? Is you have a schedule where you say, reach out to this database, to this data warehouse, and pull in the metadata into the tool. And then you have someone who uses the tool to sort of manually annotate things. So it's just one aspect of it. So we certainly have that set up. And for our Snowflake data warehouse and for our Looker dashboards, that's how it works. Every source is basically a YAML configuration. So again, DataHub on the back end has an API and it has a CLI that you use to interact with that endpoint. So for any of these sources that we talk about, you basically have a particular configuration that says this is how to connect to it. This is how I want to filter things. It's a production environment, it's a test environment. You can tell it really for any of the different sources how you want to filter and tag your data as it's coming in. So when I talked about domains, this is where you basically set that up. The second, and I think this is where we start to get into that like difference in philosophy about those types of tools, is the idea of active ingestion. So whenever we change a dashboard or we change a DDP model, that's a commit and a pull request that someone's opening to make that change. And in the GitHub action for that change, we have a task which basically pushes that updated model or metadata through the DataHub. So that's how you get the kind of up-to-date view of like your descriptions and your metadata that DBT provides. And same for LookML as well. Someone updates a dashboard, we push that data in. Again, for the GitHub actions, pretty similar. Each of them has a different plugin. So this is all Python client with different packages for your different sources. And each of them has its own YAML configuration. So this is an example of one for DBT. So I spin up my GitHub action on the container. I'm going to generate these files, and this is where I want to get the information to push using the DataHub CLI at the bottom here. So run DataHub ingest, pass it the config, and it will send the updated snapshot to the tool. And I think this is like one of the really key points, I think, of this whole experience for me with DataHub, is this notion of sort of shift left, whereby what you ideally want to do to make this a sort of organizationally scalable thing is to declare and maintain your metadata in the tools that people already use. And so DBT and Looker are great candidates for that. For that, having your developers as part of their tasks actually update the schema, the documentation, the tests. I didn't even touch on the tests. I actually was one point I wanted to cover that I skipped over. DBT has this ability to define tests on your data as part of its models. So whenever we run our pipeline, back to this example, you see here there's a second step where we call DDP Test. So when you run your model and then you run your tests, and your tests will be things like, this column should be unique, this column should have these particular values. It's data quality assertions, essentially. And we also push that information to DataHub as well. So back to that question of trust in the data sets. If I'm an analyst and I can see there's a test suite associated with this model and table, I can see, oh, actually, some of these are failing, or some of these have failed at a particular point in time. That's really useful information to have. And yeah, the final point of this is just that is another point at which we inject metadata into the platform. So this point here at which we actually run the pipeline in Airflow is the final place where we're pushing in information. So the tests run, we call the CLI to push that information in, and that's what gives you your kind of very complete view of your pipeline. So just to close out, final thoughts. Really, for me, if you were to take anything away from this, it's that, like, sort of set the tool aside. Like, DataHub is a good fit for us because of the tools that we use. And with where we're at and us wanting to work out, is this a thing that's actually going to work for our users? So we want to sort of build adoption with our analysts and learn as we go and figure out, like, what do people actually get from this that's valuable? And being able to sort of, build this using the open source version and kind of trial it and work through it has been really useful. But I would say the main thing is look for those sort of 3 key concepts. The ability of a tool to not just be like this scheduled thing that pulls your data schemas in from your database, but that it can also reach into the tools that connect those things together. So for lineage, that's a huge gap potentially a lot of the time, is the fact that you don't have visibility of when things run, of like the steps in the pipeline and the dependencies between your different data sets. And that's really the second point, is what DataHub themselves refer to as Metadata 360. So the idea that you want a more comprehensive view of your whole ecosystem than just the actual place that you store the data. And finally, then that point about like trying to be push-based, right? So not just having things that are refreshed once a day, but actually refreshed when the pipeline runs, when the model's updated. So that's like, anecdotally, I can tell you, talking to analysts in our organization, they want to see, for our pipelines that maybe run every half hour or every 15 minutes, did it fail sort of consecutively 2 or 3 times in a row, or is it actually as up to date as it could be? And the only way that you really get that is by having it sort of be push based at the time that things run. So if you want to try this out, this is a publicly available demo. Actually, you can go to this site on DataHub on their website and have a play around and write questionable things in their glossary. There's not really any security around it, so I guess you could do that if you wanted to. Luckily, no one did that for this recording. And that's it. So may have time for questions, possibly?
Loads of time for questions.
All good?
But,
yeah. Okay. So, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
You mentioned like a big part of like kind of your Git pipeline. Do you put anything there like to notify, for example, if somebody's looking to change to a schema that would affect something else? Like I guess like the contracts between, for example, looking at the warehouse then looking at the mart. Do you put stuff like that in there?
Yeah, so that could probably be like a whole talk in itself. But so it's a good question. So the question was, for anyone who didn't hear, is like, in those pipelines or in those GitHub actions, what are the sort of, I guess, the quality control that you would have around changing schemas, around, the changes that people are introducing? So there's actually a second framework that we use in association with DBT called Elementary. I don't think it takes you to it if you search for Elementary. You probably have to search for Elementary data. But it's, I'd say there's kind of 2 competing products in this space at the moment for observability, right, and sort of quality control around DBT models. One is RE data, RE_data, and the other is Elementary. And so we kind of had a look at both, decided to go with Elementary in the end. Just actually because primarily I thought their documentation was a lot better than the competitor. But Elementary basically is the thing that is looking at your tests and your models and putting things like schema change control, or saying okay, these tests failed, that's a warning. These tests failed, that's an alert to Slack, right? So it's kind of the observability piece in that stack. Might actually be listed here. So where we have elementary metrics at that point as well. And that's part of the test metrics that we push into the platform as well, is happening at that point. Okay. Sure, yeah.
So the company I work for, it's a very similar system. We're using Snowflake as the central data store. And you can roughly break our system architecture into two. There's the system that pulls data from its sources in Snowflake and the system that pushes data from sources. We work with the push-based one, and I'll definitely be showing this presentation to the other team because they use DBT. They use very similar setup to this, and they're actually looking for ways to automate updating DataHub. We're actually trying to use DataHub the same stories yourself. Like we found this tool, it's very new, and it seems to answer a lot of questions, so we're going to go. On our side of the system, it's a little bit different than DBT. We're using Kafka, and we're storing schemas in schema registry. It's much more like sort of streaming-based system. Do you have any advice around using that and keeping DataHub up to date with schemas stored within schema registry?
In streaming sources? Yeah, we don't really have, I would say, it's truly a streaming source currently. So like I know Kafka is supported as a source, but it's not one that we really use. So yeah, I'm afraid I probably can't really give you any practical advice on that one. But yeah, I mean, I guess probably the difficulty there is maybe the scale, right? Because obviously DataHub, I mean, one thing I didn't mention is DataHub on the back end also is using Kafka itself. So your API, we don't really cover the architecture of it here, but essentially it's Elasticsearch, which is what's backing the front end that we demoed. And then you have your underlying API. So I guess it's maybe a question of throughput there. Nothing we're doing here is really particularly high throughput, so I'm not overly worried about the API kind of creaking and falling over under pressure. But
yeah, just in terms of endpoint, once you've got the data in DataHub, would you use DataHub to do your dashboarding of the data, or would you use something else then if you're having to like turn this all into pie charts and bar charts for non-techie people?
Right. Well, I mean, that's an interesting question actually around dashboarding. So one thing that we've considered around actually, dog fooding essentially and like using Looker, say, as a dashboard to look into this information. Elementary, for example, which is the observability tool here, is a DBT model itself, which is again, even more layers of meta in this conversation. So it actually stores all of its information in Snowflake. So if you wanted to, you could build a dashboard. There'd be nothing to stop you to build a dashboard to dig into those schemas that it generates and say, here's our test run or like pass percentage over time or something, not sure, but theoretically you could do that. DataHub itself, I mean, like I say, mainly the use case for us is around that data discovery side. So it is more around, like, again, to give you an example, our data science team is really interested in, again, that picture that you got from the glossary, right, of like what are the different sources associated with this concept, right? So if I want to build a model around traffic, what are all the different data sets that we have on traffic? What are the ones that are not deprecated and so on and so forth? So that we haven't really thought, I guess, about other ways that you can.
It's not so much on the reporting side for you.
Yeah, it's not really a reporting tool in that way. It is more of a data discovery for metadata.
Yeah, so where this
Type
is coming
tool.
from is like we use Snowflake for, say, team metrics going in, and then we use Tableau to pull
Right,
the dashboards out of Snowflake to say, here's what's going on with your team, and then at a higher level, here's what's going on in your department.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Okay.
Who do you find actually using it? So I see like you've got the metric, like the last timestamp there that you mentioned could be interesting to like analysts. And I guess who actually uses your DataHub? Like looks at it at that level.
So the people that really use it in Insider at the moment would be a mix of the data engineering team. So like, myself, for data engineers, data analysts. So we analysts, in terms of our analyst teams, we sort of have like product intelligence, so teams who are sort of looking at analyzing different aspects of, our actual products, right? So like, traffic, newsletter performance, like, all kinds of different things. So they're interested in it, and our data science team as well. So I would say those are kind of the main stakeholders for it. So we're only about, I would say, maybe 2 or 3 months into this journey with it, right? So we're very much in the working out what we need from the tool and working out who else potentially could be interested in this. I think among that group, the feeling is that it's probably not just us that could benefit from this, but actually also the wider organization that's interested in what data that we have. Because I know, again, anecdotally, you get people coming from lots of different teams saying, can I have access to this data set, to Looker, and so on. And quite often people, again, don't know what they're asking for. They have a feeling that you have something for them, but they don't quite know. So I definitely think there's opportunities there around, again, the data discovery, especially when we get the business glossary fully fleshed out. That, again, is a kind of work in progress for us. So, okay. Okay. That's it. So, thank you.